My name is Nora Callahan. I am 31 years old. And on a gray Wednesday morning in February of 2024, I sat inside a courtroom in the Bexar County Courthouse in San Antonio, Texas, and listened to both of my parents tell a judge that I had manipulated a dying woman, that I had always been selfish, and that I did not deserve a single thing left to me by the grandmother who was, without question, the only person in my family who ever truly loved me. I sat at the table on the left side of that courtroom with my hands folded in front of me. My attorney, Paul Mercer, was at my side, his pen moving steadily across a yellow legal pad. On the other side of the aisle, my parents sat with their attorney, a man named Douglas Hale, who had driven up from Houston and was clearly working off a version of events that had been carefully filtered before it ever reached him. My father, Ray Callahan, was 55. He wore a sport coat that pulled at the shoulders and a tie he had clearly not worn in years. My mother, Diane Callahan, was 53. She sat with her back straight and her chin lifted, the way she always did when she wanted people to believe she was the most reasonable person in any room. Behind them in the gallery sat my older brother Cody, 34, who hadn't slept in days by the look of him, and my younger sister Amber, 26, who had her eyes on her phone from the moment she walked in. They were there to support my parents. That was nothing new. They had been standing in front of me my entire life, blocking the light. The case was listed as Callahan versus Callahan. It was a will contest. My grandmother, Ruth Delaney, had passed away 5 months earlier, in September of 2023, at the age of 79. She left behind her home in Bourne, Texas, a small town about 30 miles northwest of San Antonio, a savings account containing just over $220,000, and a collection of antique quilts and furniture that had been in her family for 4 generations. In her will, she had left all of it to me. When my parents found out, they didn't grieve. They lawyered up. But before I tell you what happened inside that courtroom, I need to take you back. Because this story didn't begin with a judge and a gavel. It began in a 3-bedroom house on the east side of San Antonio, where I grew up feeling like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. My father worked long hours in logistics for a trucking company near the interstate. My mother managed the front desk at a dental office part-time. They made enough to keep things together, but just barely, and the financial stress that ran through our house like a live wire had a way of making everyone short with each other. Everyone except the children who weren't me. Cody was the firstborn, the only son, and in my father's eyes, that meant something close to royalty. Whatever Cody needed, Cody got. When he wanted to play travel baseball at 12, my father found the money for equipment, fees, and weekend tournaments the same year he told me I couldn't attend a school art camp because it cost $60. When Cody dropped out of his first semester of college, my father called it a rough patch. When I brought home a report card with straight B's, my mother glanced at it and said nothing. Amber was the baby. She was small and charming and my mother's whole world from the day she was born. They shopped together, matched outfits, shared inside jokes I was never part of. Amber was the daughter my mother introduced with pride. I was the daughter my mother forgot to mention. And then there was me. Nora. The middle child, the quiet one. The one who sat at the dinner table and listened to her parents discuss Cody's potential and Amber's cuteness while she moved food around her plate and wondered if anyone would notice if she simply disappeared. I want to be clear about something. My parents didn't hurt me in any way that left a visible mark. They didn't raise their hands or raise their voices in the ways that get documented. What they did was quieter than that, and in some ways, harder to explain. They made me invisible. They made me feel like an accident. Like I was something that had happened to them rather than someone they had chosen to love. I existed in that house the way background noise exists present but unnoticed. I learned early to take care of myself. I figured out homework at the library. I patched together school supplies from what I could find. When I was sad or confused about why my parents seemed to love everyone else more than me, I sat on the back steps of our house and made promises to myself about who I was going to become. The one person who saw me, who actually, consistently saw me, was my grandmother. Ruth Delaney was my mother's mother. She was nothing like her daughter. She was warm, where my mother was cool. Curious, where my mother was dismissive. She lived alone in a small brick house in Bourne, with a porch swing and a garden full of black-eyed Susans. Every other Saturday, she would invite me over for lunch. Just me. Not Cody. Not Amber. Just me. We'd eat grilled cheese and tomato soup and sit on that porch, and she would ask me about my life like the answers actually mattered. She asked what I wanted to be. She asked what made me happy. And she listened, fully, without checking her phone or glancing at the clock. When I was 16, I won a regional writing competition and came home with a certificate and a small cash prize. I held it out to my father, hoping just once for something that looked like pride. He said, "That's nice, Nora," and went back to the television. My mother was on the phone. She didn't turn around. I walked outside, sat on the back steps, and made myself a promise. Not for them. For me. I promised that I would build a life so full and so real that their silence would one day feel like irrelevance. That promise walked me out of San Antonio. Through 4 years of grinding through college at UT San Antonio on a partial scholarship and 2 jobs, and eventually into a master's program in social work at the University of Texas at Austin. The day I got my acceptance letter, I called my grandmother. She screamed so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. I did not call my parents. There was no point. I graduated, moved back to San Antonio, and built a career in child welfare advocacy. I worked for a nonprofit that supported foster families. Then eventually founded my own organization, the Delaney Project, named after my grandmother, which provided free case management and legal navigation services to families caught in the child welfare system. We were small at first. Just me, a part-time coordinator named Simone, and a folding table in a borrowed office space. Within 2 years, we had a staff of 8 and had served over 300 families. A local journalist profiled me in the San Antonio Express News in the spring of 2022. The headline read, "She aged out of invisibility. Now she fights for families who feel the same way." The article was shared thousands of times. I received messages from people all over the country who recognized themselves in my story. My parents read the article. My mother texted me that same weekend, the first time she had contacted me in almost a year, to say she thought I was being dramatic about my childhood and that I had always exaggerated. I read the message, set my phone down, and went back to work. In the last 2 years of her life, my grandmother and I grew closer than ever. I drove out to Bourne every Sunday. I brought lunch. We sat on the porch swing, and she told me things she'd never said out loud before about the tension between her and my mother. About the years she'd watched my mother overlook me. About the guilt she carried for not intervening sooner. "I should have said something louder," she told me one afternoon. "I should have made them listen." "You said it to me," I told her. That was enough. When she was diagnosed with congestive heart failure in the summer of 2022, I started making the drive twice a week, then more. When her condition worsened in early 2023, I moved into the guest room. I reduced my hours at the organization, asked Simone to hold things together, and focused on being present for the woman who had always been present for me. My mother visited twice in 8 months. Both times she spent most of the visit talking about how hard things had been for her and my father. The mortgage, Cody's latest setback, Amber's divorce. She did not offer to help. She did not ask what Ruth needed. She came, she vented, and she left. Cody never visited. Amber came once with her daughter, stayed 20 minutes and left. I was the one who was there. Every single day. In January of 2023, my grandmother asked me to call her attorney, a man named Gerald Marsh, who had handled her affairs for 15 years. She updated her will. I was not in the room when it was drafted. I made tea and waited downstairs. When Gerald came down, he looked at me with a kind expression and said, "Your grandmother is a remarkable woman." I didn't ask what was in the document. It wasn't why I was there. Ruth Delaney passed away on the 4th of September 2023, at 5:22 inches the morning. I was holding her hand. I sat with her for a long time after. Then I called Gerald. Then the funeral home. Then, because I felt I had to, I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. I told her Ruth was gone. There was a pause. Then my mother said, "We're going to need to talk about the house. Not I'm sorry. Not are you okay. Just, we need to talk about the house." I hung up. I organized the funeral. I wrote the eulogy. My parents came in dark clothes, wearing expressions I recognized as performance. Cody and Amber stood in the back. I stood at the podium and spoke about a woman who had taught me that being seen is not a luxury, it is a human right. I did not mention my parents. I didn't need to. 3 weeks later, my parents filed a will contest in Bexar County Probate Court. Their claim, that I had exercised undue influence over Ruth during her final months, that I had isolated her from the family, and that the will should be thrown out. Every word of it was false. I hired Paul Mercer, a probate attorney I had worked alongside on several foundation cases. He was methodical, unflappable, and deeply familiar with the Bexar County courts. When he told me the case had been assigned to Judge Patricia Okafor, a judge I had appeared before twice in child welfare proceedings, I went quiet. He asked if something was wrong. "No," I said. I just wasn't expecting the universe to have a sense of humor. The hearing was the 14th of February 2024, Valentine's Day. My parents' attorney, Douglas Hale, opened by painting a picture of a grieving family pushed aside by an opportunistic daughter who had used her proximity to a dying woman to seize an inheritance. He called my father to the stand. Ray Callahan described a close family, regularly shut out by me. He said I had always been distant and difficult. He said Ruth had been confused in her final months. None of it was true. All of it was delivered in a tone of wounded sincerity. Then my mother took the stand. When Douglas Hale asked her to describe my role in the family, she didn't hesitate. Nora was never invested in this family, she said. She was always somewhere else, always doing her own thing. She never showed up when it mattered. She's always been the selfish one. She pressed a tissue to her eye, and now she's taken my mother from me even in death. She manipulated a sick old woman, Your Honor. That's all she did. The courtroom was quiet. Judge Patricia Okafor had been taking notes. Her pen stopped moving. She removed her reading glasses, folded her hands, and in a voice that was perfectly level and absolutely deliberate, she said, "Mr. Hale." Hale looked up. "Yes, Your Honor. Before we go any further, do you know who the respondent in this case is? Do you actually know who Nora Callahan is?" Hale blinked. "She is the granddaughter of the decedent, Your Honor. The petitioner's daughter." Judge Okafor's expression didn't shift. "That is not what I asked." The room stopped breathing. The judge looked out across the courtroom, then directly at my mother, who was still sitting in the witness chair. "For the record," she said, "Nora Callahan is the founder of the Delaney Project, a nonprofit organization that has provided direct services to hundreds of families involved in the child welfare system right here in Bexar County. She has appeared before this court and others in this building on numerous occasions, always as an advocate for children and families who had no one else in their corner. Her work has been recognized by this court, by the San Antonio Bar Association, and by multiple state agencies." She paused. "The woman your clients have just described as selfish and absent has spent the better part of a decade showing up for strangers who needed her. She did that without a trust fund, without a safety net, and based on what I am hearing today, without the support of the family sitting across this room from her." My mother's face had gone pale. My father sat perfectly still, both hands gripping the edge of the table. Hale straightened his tie. "Your Honor, with respect, the respondent's professional background is not relevant to the question of undue influence." Judge Okafor looked at him steadily. "Mr. Hale, your client spent 30 minutes attempting to establish that this woman is self-serving and unreliable. I am establishing for the record that the documented evidence of her life directly contradicts that characterization. That is entirely relevant." Hale sat down and did not speak again unless spoken to. Paul Mercer presented our case with the quiet efficiency of someone who had already won and knew it. He submitted the written declaration from Ruth's cardiologist, confirming she had been mentally competent and clear-minded until the final 48 hours of her life. He played a video deposition from Gerald Marsh, who confirmed that Ruth had contacted him of her own initiative, that I had not been present during the drafting, and that Ruth's words to him had been, and he quoted directly, "I want Nora to have everything, because Nora was here." Paul then submitted the visitor log. I had kept it at Gerald's suggestion: dates, times, duration of every visit Ruth received in her final year. The log showed that I was present every day. My mother had visited 4 times. Amber once. Cody 0. My father 0. Next to an entry from July 2023, Ruth had written in the margin, "Nora made chicken and dumplings tonight. We watched Wheel of Fortune, and she let me win at cards. She is my greatest gift." There was no margin note next to anyone else's name, because no one else had come. When Paul finished, Judge Okafor reviewed her notes for what felt like a long time. Then she looked up. "I have reviewed the medical records, the testimony of the drafting attorney, the visitor documentation, the financial records, and the testimony of the petitioners themselves," she said. "I find no credible evidence, none to support the claim of undue influence. What I find instead is a woman who chose to be present, at real personal cost, for someone who loved her, and a family that chose not to be present, and is now contesting the consequences of that choice." She picked up her gavel. "The petition to contest the will of Ruth Ann Delaney is denied. The estate will be distributed in full accordance with the terms of the will to Nora Callahan. Court is adjourned." The gavel came down. My mother made a sound I don't have a word for. My father stared at the table. Hale quietly packed his briefcase, and I sat very still, hands folded, and felt not triumph, not relief, just a deep, aching sadness that it had come to this, that it had taken a courtroom and a judge to say out loud what my grandmother had been saying to me for 20 years. I was not selfish. I was not absent. I was not the one who failed this family. I live in Ruth's house in Bourne now. I repainted the porch the soft yellow she always talked about. I kept the porch swing. I kept the garden. And every spring, the black-eyed Susans come back without me doing a single thing to encourage them. They just come back. The Delaney Project now serves over 500 families a year. We opened a second office in 2024. The mentorship program we launched for youth aging out of foster care, I named it the Ruth Initiative, has served 43 young people in its first year. My mother called once, about 3 weeks after the hearing, I watched her name on the screen and let it ring. She didn't leave a voicemail. Winning didn't fix what was broken. It never does. But it gave me something I hadn't expected. Clarity. The cleanest, most permanent kind. The kind that finally lets you put something down. I don't hate my parents. Hate is weight I don't have room for. What I feel now is distance, calm, honest, chosen distance. The kind of space you create not out of anger, but out of self-respect. If you are watching this, and you recognize yourself in any part of this story, if you are the one who was told you'd never amount to anything, the one who was overlooked, the one who made yourself small to fit into a space that was never built for you, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not what they said you were. You are not the story they wrote about you. You are not defined by the people who failed to love you the way you deserved. You are defined by what you do with the life they tried to limit. My grandmother once told me that the most powerful thing a woman can do is refuse to believe the lie that was told about her before she was old enough to argue with it. She was right. I am Nora Callahan. I am 31 years old. I am not selfish. I never was. And the people who said I was just watched a judge prove it in writing. On the record. Forever. If this story meant something to you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your experience in the comments. I read every single one. Your story matters too.